In 391 AD, a Roman emperor issued a specific decree. His name was Theodosius I, and what he ordered, destroyed, wasn't just a building. It was every text inside the Library of Alexandria, the largest single collection of ancient knowledge ever assembled. An estimated 700,000 documents, gone. Historians call it one of the greatest intellectual catastrophes in human history. But what they rarely mention is what was specifically targeted first. Not political records, not military documents, the Hermetic texts, the writings attributed to a figure the Egyptians called Thoth and the Greeks called Hermes Trismegistus. Thrice great, the keeper of all knowledge. These texts were not burned because they were irrelevant. They were burned because someone decided they were dangerous. This is the story of what those texts actually contained, and why the most powerful institution in the ancient world spent 3 centuries trying to eliminate them. To understand what was destroyed, we need to understand what Thoth actually was, not the mythology, the historical record. The earliest verified references to Thoth appear in ancient Egyptian texts dating back to approximately 3000 BC. The pyramid texts, discovered carved into the walls of burial chambers at Saqqara. In these texts, Thoth is not described the way later traditions would portray him. He is not just a god of writing or wisdom. He is described as the one who speaks reality into existence. The divine tongue, the mind through which the universe organizes itself. The Egyptians had a specific term for this, hika, divine speech. The belief that language, sound, and intention were not metaphors for power. They were power itself. Modern researchers studying the pyramid texts have noted something disturbing. The mathematical relationships encoded in the descriptions of Thoth, the ratios, the cycles, the geometric principles, correspond with a precision that cannot be accidental to what we now call sacred geometry. Patterns that appear in the construction of the Great Pyramid. Patterns that appear in the Fibonacci sequence. Patterns that appear in the behavior of quantum systems. This was not superstition. This was a specific and highly developed body of knowledge, encoded in the language of mythology so it could survive. And for thousands of years, it did. Here is what mainstream history tells us about Thoth. He was the Egyptian god of the moon, writing, and knowledge. He was depicted as an ibis-headed figure carrying a stylus and a scroll, the eternal scribe recording the deeds of gods and men. His most famous role in Egyptian mythology was at the weighing of the heart, the judgment of the dead. When a soul passed from this world, it stood before Osiris. The heart was placed on a scale against the feather of Maat, the symbol of truth and divine order. And Thoth stood beside the scale recording the result, not judging, recording. This distinction is significant. Thoth was not the moral authority. He was the keeper of the record, the one who saw everything and wrote everything down. In Egyptian cosmology, he was described as self-created, not born of other gods but emerging from his own knowledge. He predated creation. He was present at the moment the universe began. When Greek scholars encountered Egyptian civilization, their reaction was not dismissal. It was awe. They recognized in Thoth something that matched their own traditions of a divine teacher, and they merged him with Hermes, their messenger god and guide of souls. But they added something. They called this merged figure Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes, and they attributed to him a body of philosophical writings, the Hermetic corpus, that described the fundamental laws of the universe with such precision that Renaissance scientists would later use them as a foundation for the scientific revolution. Isaac Newton owned a copy of the Hermetic texts. He considered them primary sources. That detail is almost never mentioned. Here is where the documented history becomes disturbing. The Hermetic corpus that survived into the modern era is only a fragment. Scholars estimate that what we have today represents perhaps 10 to 15% of what originally existed. The rest was systematically destroyed, and we know by whom. In 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea, convened by the Emperor Constantine, made a decision that would reshape intellectual history. In establishing the official doctrine of the early Christian Church, they designated certain categories of knowledge as incompatible with the new order. Hermetic philosophy was at the top of that list, not because it was false, because it was competitive, because it offered an understanding of divinity that required no institution, no intermediary, no priesthood. It taught that the divine was not external, that it was accessible directly through the cultivation of the mind. That idea was a direct threat to every structure of religious authority. Over the following decades, libraries across the Roman Empire were purged. In 391 AD, Theodosius made it official. The Great Serapeum in Alexandria, which housed the last major collection of Hermetic texts, was ordered destroyed by the bishop Theophilus. Contemporary accounts describe the burning as deliberate and systematic. This was not an accident of history, it was a policy, but what they could not destroy was what had already been copied, hidden, carried east. In 529 AD, the Emperor Justinian closed the Platonic Academy in Athens, the last major institution of Hermetic and philosophical learning in the Western world. Its scholars fled to Persia, carrying their texts with them. The knowledge went underground. It would not resurface in Europe for more than 1,000 years. Then, in 1460, a manuscript arrived in Florence. It had been acquired by agents of Cosimo de' Medici, the most powerful banking family in Renaissance Italy. Cosimo was so fascinated by what he had found that he ordered his chief scholar Marsilio Ficino to stop translating Plato, which he was already halfway through, and translate this manuscript first. What Ficino translated was the Corpus Hermeticum, the surviving Hermetic texts, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, attributed to Thoth. Within decades, the texts transformed European intellectual culture. The Renaissance, the explosion of art, science, philosophy, and humanist thought, was, in significant part, a direct consequence of the rediscovery of this suppressed ancient knowledge. And here is the detail that almost nobody mentions. 14 of Copernicus's propositions in his revolutionary astronomical model, the model that placed the Sun at the center of the solar system, directly echo passages from the Hermetic texts. The idea that the Sun was the center, that it was the source of divine light and life, was not Copernicus's invention. It was Thoth's teaching, buried for a millennium, recovered, and then presented as a revolutionary new idea. The knowledge was never truly lost. It was suppressed, then rediscovered. And the people who rediscovered it were very careful not to mention where it came from. So what did the Hermetic texts actually teach that was so threatening? 3 things, and each one deserves to be taken seriously, not as spiritual metaphor, but as a specific claim about the nature of reality. The first, the mind is not inside the universe. The universe is inside the mind. The Hermetic texts describe consciousness not as a product of physical processes, but as the fundamental substrate of reality itself. Everything that exists, matter, energy, time, is a manifestation of divine mind. This is not mysticism. This is a specific philosophical position. And it is remarkably close to what certain interpretations of quantum mechanics now suggest. That the act of observation is not passive. That consciousness participates in the collapse of the wave function. That reality at its most fundamental level behaves differently when it is being observed. The physicist David Bohm, who worked with Einstein, spent the last decades of his life developing what he called the implicate order, a theory that the visible universe is a kind of projection from a deeper underlying reality. a holographic structure in which every part contains the information of the whole. He never cited Thoth, but the Hermetic texts describe exactly this structure using the phrase, "as above, so below." The second, time is not linear. The Hermetic texts describe time as a river that can be navigated, not just experienced. They speak of accessing past, present, and future simultaneously through specific states of consciousness. This was dismissed as mystical nonsense for centuries. Modern physics now describes time as a dimension, not fundamentally different from spatial dimensions. And certain quantum experiments have demonstrated effects that appear to move backward through time. The language is different. The claim is the same. The third, death is a transition, not an ending. Thoth's description of the soul's journey after death is not a comfort story. It is a technical document. It describes specific stages, specific trials, specific conditions under which consciousness persists or dissolves. It maps a territory with the precision of a geography, not the vagueness of hope. Whether you believe it or not is not the point. The point is that this was not a religion. It was a system, a highly structured, internally consistent system for understanding what consciousness is and what happens to it. And someone spent 3 centuries trying to erase it. The Emerald Tablets, the most famous text attributed to Thoth, have a documented history that most people don't know. The earliest surviving Latin version dates to the 12th century. But the text itself claims to be a translation of something far older, a text inscribed on a tablet of green stone, found in a tomb attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. Whether that origin story is literal or symbolic does not change what the text contains. And what it contains is a description of the universe that is structurally consistent with discoveries that were not made until the 20th century. The principle of vibration, the idea that everything in existence is in constant motion, that matter and energy are different expressions of the same underlying frequency. This was described in the Emerald Tablets centuries before the development of quantum field theory. The principle of correspondence, as above, so below, describes a fractal structure of reality in which patterns at one scale repeat at every other scale. This is not poetry. This is a description of what mathematicians now call fractal geometry, formalized by Benoit Mandelbrot in 1975. These are not coincidences. They are either evidence of a genuinely advanced understanding of reality that was deliberately suppressed, or they are the most extraordinary series of lucky guesses in intellectual history. The question is, which explanation requires more faith? Thoth's knowledge survived the Roman emperor. It survived the burning of the greatest library in the ancient world. It survived 1,000 years of deliberate suppression. It survived because it was true enough that people kept copying it, hiding it, and carrying it across borders in the middle of the night. The question is not whether this knowledge exists. Documented history proves that it does. The question is what you do with it. Drop a comment with the single detail from this video that you had never heard before. The most common answer tells us exactly where to go next. Because the story of Thoth does not end in ancient Egypt. It ends here, in this moment, in the question you're now asking yourself. And we're just getting started.